Standing in the center of the Pentagon Grand Assembly Hall, I was surrounded by dozens of brass and decorated officers, but the only person who mattered was my own father, General Harrison. I had just returned from a highly classified mission overseas, exhausted and physically spent, expecting a standard debriefing. Instead, my father marched straight to the podium, his face contorted in an explosive fury I had never seen before. Before I could process what was happening, his voice thundered across the acoustic room, declaring me a disgraced traitor to the country I had nearly bled for. A suffocating quiet fell over the massive auditorium as General Harrison marched down the steps, striding directly up to me with heavy, aggressive footsteps. He reached out and violently tore the rank insignia off my shoulders, shredding the fabric of my formal dress uniform. He stripped away my ribbons and medals, letting them clatter against the cold marble floor as his hands shook with unbridled rage. I stood like a stone statue, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But when he grabbed the back of my jacket, his violent yank tore the main seam down my spine, exposing the bare skin underneath. The icy draft hit my back, revealing a sliver of dark ink hidden beneath my shirt, and an instant hush settled over the high-ranking crowd. I could have offered an immediate explanation or pleaded with my father to stop his public humiliation, but I chose absolute silence instead. I calmly unclipped the remaining buttons of my jacket, let the ruined cloth drop into a heap at my feet, and turned around to present my back to the room. Stretched wide across my shoulder blades was a bold, black emblem of silver wings framing a single star. It was the classified tattoo of the Vanguard Ghost Initiative, a phantom Black Ops division that officially had been dissolved over a decade ago. Gasps instantly echoed across the massive hall as officers realized what they were looking at, muttering that only executive orders could mobilize that unit. My father stood frozen, his face draining of color as confusion rapidly replaced his anger. Yet his ingrained pride compelled him to bark out an order for the guards to arrest me. Nobody moved an inch. Then, the heavy wooden chair at the main table scraped back, and Admiral Vance, the highest-ranking naval officer present, slowly stood up. He stared in absolute disbelief at the mark on my back, turned to my father, and quietly declared 3 words that shattered the entire room, stating that I outranked him. The shockwave from those 3 words sent the assembly into total chaos, leaving my father looking completely ghostly pale. Officers began frantically whispering that if I truly belonged to Vanguard Ghost, I reported directly to executive command, meaning no one in that room had legal authority over me. I calmly stooped down, picked up my ruined jacket, and accepted a plain fatigue coat offered by a silent security guard. Admiral Vance cleared his throat, his booming voice suspending all proceedings until the facts could be independently verified. My father attempted to protest, but the Admiral firmly reminded him that if I was Vanguard, he had 0 jurisdiction over my life. Admiral Vance stepped down to approach me privately, instructing me to follow him to a secure wing, for my safety and the safety of everyone present. Flanked by guards who were acting as a protective escort rather than captors, I walked down the long granite corridors of the Pentagon. Whispers trailed behind us, speculating on whether I was a true ghost, operator, or a rogue element who had betrayed the ultimate unit. But as the heavy steel doors of the holding facility sealed behind me, my mind was already racing past the immediate danger. I knew someone had deliberately framed me, and I needed to figure out who pulled the strings before they finished the job. The containment chamber was the austere 12 by 12 room with featureless, gray walls and a single flickering overhead light that hummed ceaselessly. It was deliberately engineered to strip away sensory input, forcing occupants into psychological breakdown. But I had been conditioned to survive far worse environments. Sitting on the cold metal bench, I forced my heart rate into a steady rhythm as my thoughts drifted back 15 years. I remembered standing on a rain-drenched tarmac at 19 years old, carrying a single duffel bag after signing away my identity to join Vanguard. We were invisible operatives, trained to carry out zero-trace missions that officially never took place. My mind replayed the relentless months of physical degradation and mental conditioning that had forged me into an elite operative under the call sign Raven. I remembered my unit teammates, a brilliant collective of tech specialists, combat medics, and demolition experts who had become my real family in the shadows. We had operated in complete secrecy until our unit was suddenly disbanded and erased from official military registries, leaving us scattered across the globe, yet the bond remained. etched permanently into my skin with ink that served as a silent warning to anyone who knew its origin. Now, sitting in isolation, I realized my past had finally caught up to me in the worst possible way. I reflected on my father, General Harrison, a man whose entire existence was built around rigid control and absolute military hierarchy. From my earliest childhood memories, he had treated me more like an entry-level cadet than a daughter, demanding perfection and branding anything less as unacceptable weakness. I still remembered standing at rigid attention in our backyard at 8 years old, listening to him preach about family honor and military duty. His approval was always temporary, and when I volunteered for extreme deployments at 19, his only advice was a cold warning not to tarnish the family name. He had spent his entire life protecting his reputation, making him the perfect weapon for whoever wanted me destroyed. The silence was shattered when the mechanical lock disengaged and Admiral Vance walked into the chamber, dismissing the guards before locking the door. He looked at me with a mixture of intense caution and profound respect, demanding to know if I was truly a surviving ghost of Vanguard. He plainly stated that while Vanguard operatives were priceless national assets, he would personally sign my execution order if I had actually betrayed the nation. I looked him dead in the eye and assured him that the real traitor was currently sitting comfortably in executive meetings, leveraging my father's pride to cover up an inside operation. Vance paused, realizing the terrifying implication that someone at the highest levels of command was manipulating events. He agreed to grant me 72 hours of protective isolation while he quietly initiated an independent investigation into the intelligence breach. Recognizing we needed specialized legal and technical assistance, I used the official privilege protocol to request Ethan Cross, a former legal advisor who understood Vanguard protocols. An hour later, Ethan arrived with a locked leather briefcase, his eyes filled with the sharp intensity of a man who knew how to navigate shadow wars. Together, we reviewed the corrupted mission logs, quickly identifying digital anomalies in logistics records that proved my credential data had been cloned. Furthermore, a signature stamp belonging to my father's command had been illegally applied to clear off-grid transport authorizations. Before we could act on the initial findings, the chamber's wall monitor flickered to life, broadcasting a breaking news alert to the entire world. The screen displayed doctored surveillance footage showing a figure matching my exact build, entering a weapons depot hours before a massive explosion killed 5 servicemen. The news anchor reported that high-level sources had identified me as a former covert operative turned dangerous internal saboteur. Ethan frantically pointed out the obvious digital manipulation in the video feed, but the media narrative was already setting like wet concrete. Someone was aggressively burning down every bridge I had, ensuring I would be terminated before I could present a proper defense. Recognizing that remaining in custody made me a sitting duck, I waited for the late-night guard rotation shift to make my move. Using a hidden micro tool I had concealed in my boot, I managed to bypass the electronic locks on the holding cell and slip into the Pentagon security conduits. Navigating the dark sublevels with absolute precision, I infiltrated the central data vault where encrypted classified archives were stored. Working under the high pressure of automated thermal sweeps, I managed to pull the master authorization files linked to the corrupted mission. The digital footprint led directly to Colonel Nathan Vance, my father's most trusted executive aide, revealing millions in offshore transfers linked to an armed syndicate Vanguard had fought years ago. However, the deep layer files contained an even more devastating revelation that made my chest tighten with profound grief. My father's digital authority had not just been stolen. He had actively signed off on multiple suspicious hardware transfers over the preceding 2 years. His desperate obsession with preserving his command standing had allowed Colonel Nathan to corner him, convincing him that I was a rogue liability who needed to be destroyed to save his own legacy. My father had chosen his public image over his own child, allowing himself to become an active accomplice in a massive treasonous plot just to keep his hands clean. Armed with the undeniable hard drives, I slipped back into the main Pentagon briefing room where an emergency tribunal was actively convening. The room froze as I strode up to the central table, slamming the drive onto the polished surface in front of Admiral Vance and the gathered staff. The technical officers loaded the data onto the main screens, exposing Colonel Nathan's direct financial ties to international black market syndicates in front of everyone. Colonel Nathan panicked, attempting to order immediate force, but the live security feed Ethan had rerouted to external command networks made his guilt completely absolute. Guards immediately surrounded the colonel, stripping him of his weapons as the room erupted into chaos. My father sat in his chair, looking utterly broken as he realized the horrific extent of his own blind foolishness. He attempted to apologize, stammering that he had been manipulated into believing I was a threat to the nation and our family name. I looked at him with a quiet, calm finality, telling him that his obsession with legacy had finally destroyed the only thing that actually mattered. Admiral Vance formally dismissed all charges against me, reinstating my rank and offering me full command of a reactivated Vanguard initiative. I looked around the room, feeling the heavy burden of my past finally lifting from my shoulders. 6 months later, I officially resigned from military service, turning down the chance to live in the shadows forever. I used my experience to build a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting abandoned veterans who had been discarded by the very system they swore to protect. One afternoon, Admiral Vance visited my new office, offering one last chance to lead the Ghost Unit. But I gently declined the offer. I was no longer a soldier fighting hidden battles, nor was I a daughter seeking approval from a father who couldn't see me. I had finally stepped out of the dark, building a life defined not by war, but by purpose, healing, and absolute truth.